This is Addison Shanland at AirInsight. It is December the 17th, and my guest today is Gidon Novick, who is co-founder of Lyft, a startup airline in South Africa. Gidon, thank you for making time to talk with me today.
Thank you, Addison. Thank you for having me on the show.
So, a startup in 2020 in the airline business, that's got to be one of the craziest things. But tell us about what you're doing. What is this? Introduce this airline to us.
Sure. I was a bit relieved. It was actually a CNN article that was published today, and it mentioned it mentioned us, but it also talked about a Norwegian startup in 2020. And I was relieved to know that we're not the only crazy people in the world starting an airline. But it didn't feel that crazy. I mean, listen, firstly, this thing has not been in the making for years and years and years. Quite the contrary. It's in many respects is fairly opportunistic, and COVID's had a lot to do with it. I don't have to tell you what's happened to the global airline industry. You and your audience will know very well, and all the consequences of that in terms of the availability of aircraft, the availability of infrastructure, and very excitingly for me, and we can talk about it a bit later, but the availability of the most incredibly talented, energetic people that I've ever worked with in my life, with lots and lots of industry experience. So that confluence of things really, and I suppose also in lockdown, many of us had lots of time to think about things and strategize. So it all came together in a pretty short space of time. We've only really been building this airline for about four months, maybe 5. And here we are. So quite opportunistic, but quite exciting to be back in the industry, I must say.
Now, you're trading in South Africa, where we have an interesting situation. You've got a lot of competition, but at the same time, the national airline is a complete mess. Does that help you?
You know, when I spent 13 years at Comair, and as you may know, I've had quite a long family history. My father was involved with Comair for 50 years. And for much of that time, SAA was the big competitor. That really was the primary competitive playing field, was 1 or 2 private players and the government-run airline. And as much as we complained about the unfairness of it all, it was actually okay, because we could just do a better job. Frankly, we could move a lot faster. We could focus more on customer service, all those things. So, you know, it's not an ideal situation by any means to have a state-run player in an industry, and all the distortion that it creates and all the issues that it creates. But it was actually fine back then. Whether they come back or not, who knows? I don't think there's any logical rationale. I certainly haven't heard one. I'd love to hear one, why the state competitor needs to be involved in the industry. But, you know, we're trying to do what we can do. You know, we're trying to create a unique model, a unique customer proposition in a relatively small market, and just do it really well, regardless of what the competitive activities are.
So what makes your airline different? What is the proposition?
So 2 things. I mean, we can talk, there's like 2 ways we can talk about it. And if you'd like, we can talk about both. The one is the model itself, the business model, and why we think that it's fundamentally different and more sustainable. And the other is the customer proposition. So would you like to cover both, or?
Sure.
The business model is what always bothered me about being in the airline industry and kind of stood out in my mind, was the fact that it's such a supply-driven industry. You know, you get into the business, you get lots of capital, take on tons of debt, have commitments to aircraft, either owned or leased, and then off you go, hoping that the market is going to be there to support you. Now we know that, and we've seen this year more than ever, that the market does its own thing and is incredibly sensitive to what's happening in the world. And even in normal times, if I can call them that, there's massive seasonality, cyclicality in demand for air travel. So to have a supply-driven model that is kind of committed to capacity and expensive capacity in an environment where demand is doing its own thing and has become impossible to predict. I mean, if you can help us predict demand, we definitely want to chat to you. But we've kind of come to the conclusion we can't predict demand. As I was saying, we can't predict what our competitors are going to be doing on the supply side, and we certainly can't predict demand. So how about a model that is flexible and agile? In other words, a model that has limited fixed overhead, including overheads relating to equipment and infrastructure, and a model that's very quickly able to scale up and scale down. And that's the core of the business model. Global Aviation, I'm not sure if you've spoken to them or know them very well, but they are a ACMI operator that have been in the business for 20 years. They're an incredibly competent, experienced, able business and operation based in Johannesburg. But they've never been in the airline industry. So the discussion really was, and they fully they have a domestic license in South Africa. So the opportunity really was to work with Global. They have all the pieces in place. They have the aircraft, they have the infrastructure, they have the IP, they have the skills, and to really help them vertically integrate into the airline business without the without the risks that I guess a normal airline startup would have.
So do I understand correctly? There's Lift, it's like a marketing organization, and Global is like your hardware vendor.
Global is the for all intents and purposes, the entity, the licensed entity, the airline business. We being me and a team of colleagues are working with them to provide the pieces that they don't know well: the marketing, the customer service, the systems, the IT, and to really help consumerize, I guess, their business model, which is traditionally B2B, and bringing it into the B2C space.
Who supplies the flight crew?
Global does. So Global's got a core flight crew grouping, and that's obviously been growing since we launched. So they have the flight crews, obviously Airbus A320s, and there's quite a big, actually a very big pool of flight crew Airbus trained, obviously from the SAA legacy. So that's not been an issue, and so they take care of everything flight related.
Okay. Now we spoke briefly about this SAA situation. I look at flight radar daily, and what I've noticed in South Africa is now SAF Air is doing its thing. Comair's come back. You've got Airlink doing an amazing job. Where do you fit in? I mean, at what stage is there too much supply? You mentioned it's a supply-driven industry, and of course you have lockdowns and all kinds of things going on there. People are afraid to fly because of the disease, the pandemic. But it seems to me that the airlines in South Africa are throwing a lot of seats at the market. Cape Town, Johannesburg, I think is the 9th or 10th most frequently connected cities in the world.
Yeah, I mean, that route is an incredible route. And even now, during not only COVID, but a second wave that we're experiencing in South Africa, the route is incredibly robust. I mean, we've only been operating for a week, by the way. And in our first week, I just got the stat a little bit earlier today. We ran on a 71% load factor, which is amazing, and it's a testament to the team, obviously, but also to the robustness of the Joburg Cape Town route, even in these times, and even with the supply, as you say, that has come on stream very, very quickly. So the model's got to be agile. The model's got to be able to scale up and scale down based on the non-controllables of demand and obviously competitive supply. From a proposition point of view, there's a few things. I mean, we kind of probably got too many things that we want to do on the proposition side. We talk about it every day. I've got a highly energetic team. But one of the things that we identified as being quite a key issue for travelers, and COVID has made it even more so, is the issue of flexibility, the issue of taking away the anxiety from a traveler right at the outset, of being able to make changes as things change, and boy, do things change during these kind of times, and during a pandemic in particular. So flexibility, the ability to change a booking, cancel a booking without extra fees and charges, with a very simple process online, has been really, really well accepted. I was on a flight yesterday. I was doing a couple of test flights, and most of the travelers that I spoke to, I said, why did you want to fly with us? And they really were attracted to the flexibility and the fact that it's easy and doesn't cost any extra.
It's interesting. Do you remember the name Bob Crandall?
Sure, American. Yeah.
Right. He had this famous. He had many favorite, fantastic statements, but one of those statements was "death by 1,000 cuts." Cutting price, cutting this, cutting that. How do you, I mean, there is a limited amount of, what is the number of people that travel between Cape Town and Joburg every day?
It's probably around 10,000, roughly.
10,000 people a day.
10 to 15,000.
And there are like 4 or 5 airlines gaming this market. How do you guys going to break even? Particularly after the holidays, you're having summer now. Everybody's going to Cape Town because you couldn't get a nicer beach to go to, right?
Yeah.
But March is coming. April's coming. How do you survive that?
Yeah.
That 10,000 is not going to be 10,000 anymore.
Yeah, it's a bit more than 10,000. I think I've understated it. Probably closer to 15. It depends when you're talking about. If you're talking about pre-COVID, probably 15, even 20,000 a day. But yeah, so our seasonality is a bit different in that we're pretty busy now, and January, mid-Jan, it quietens down significantly until March. And March, April are actually very, very good months for travel in South Africa, because you get, there's all the holidays, the Easter holidays, as well as lots of events, which I'm not sure if those will happen this year. But then business travel is also back on stream, which in and of itself obviously is a big question, is how much business travel will be done and how much will be replaced by video conferencing. So there's just so many questions which we just frankly don't have the answer to. What we know we can do is we can produce seats at a very low cost. We know we can innovate and create a product that people want to experience. We can build a brand that people aspire to. So those are, that's kind of where we're coming from. We're not trying to take over the market. As you said, Joburg, Cape Town's a pretty big market, even in global terms. And we're quite happy just to build a niche in that market.
One of the operational issues that I think most people that are familiar with where you're operating would be thinking, the issue with SAA right now is labor. The government is fighting with the pilots union. But generally in South Africa, labor laws are not very helpful to people who are entrepreneurs. How are you going to avoid the labor trouble, the unions?
I don't think it has to be trouble. I spent, as I mentioned, 13 years at Comair. We had unions across most of the major staffing areas, and it was fine. I mean, there were some irritating discussions and negotiations and frustrating times, but for the most part, we had a culture where we worked with our people, not against them. And I think that's really, really important, regardless of whether it's unionized or not. And I do think COVID has changed things. I think there's an appreciation for work, certainly in this country, greater than what there was in the past.
Right.
And I think it's a function of culture. I really do think it's a
Right.
function of culture.
It's interesting. In April, we did a story where we talked about how the airline industry has gone. January, February, there was globally a pilot shortage.
Yeah.
4 to 6 weeks later, there was a surplus. Literally fell off the cliff. So I can understand that people in the industry, and in South Africa, probably no different than anywhere else, would rather have a job than not have a job in the industry, this industry particularly. So I hope that corporate culture thing that you're talking about is effective for you.
Yeah. Sorry, I missed the last bit. You froze a second.
Uh,
Said
what I'm
corporate
saying is
culture.
that your focus on corporate culture, working with people, not against them, is going to be critical to. You've got the systemic issue of the industry generally, pilots, flight crew, desperate to keep their jobs, any job in the industry. You offering that job, and I would imagine there would be more collaborative interaction than normally.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. And it's just, again, I think it's, it's making sure that whoever becomes part of our team, and even when we grow, that they feel a part of it, that they're empowered to make decisions, that we don't micromanage them. We're working with actually an incredible team of pilots that are multi-skilled people. They're running elements of our operation. One of our captains is heading up our technology. So he flies, he does his hours, he's flying a few days a week. He's responsible for all our systems. He's a brilliant guy. So, I just think that as long as people are part of the team, are made to feel part of the team, can get on with things, make decisions, particularly when you're dealing with customer service people, at airports, cabin crew, people have got to be empowered to get on with the job and find meaningful work. Make sure that they really are a part of what we're doing.
And when I look at the market that you're trading in, it seems to me that, right, so you've got one very thick route, but what about beyond the borders? Is there opportunity for you to go beyond the borders?
Yeah, there will always be an opportunity. As you know, it's highly regulated and process driven in terms of getting onto those many of those routes. That whole situation is in flux now, with SAA being out the market, with many of the other state carriers also being in their own versions of business rescue or bankruptcy. So I think that will be an opportunity. But again, like we're not setting out a business plan to go and tackle 10 regional routes. We're trying to build a business model, a business structure with the flexibility and agility that when the opportunities arise, we'll be very quick to get onto them. And I think that's more our thinking than planning a route network. Remember, we are in the southern point of Africa. We can't fly south. We can only fly north if we want to expand. And we need to be aware of those opportunities and ready for them when they come.
Last question for you. Looking ahead, next 5 years, what can we expect from you by way of growth, fleet growth? Can you share any thoughts on that?
Not really. I mean, again, it sounds like it's sounding like quite a boring plan, but I can tell you these A320s that we're operating, again, early days, are most incredible aircraft. We will be looking for good deals in A320s over time, over the next few years, as the model proves itself. And we'll just see what opportunities present themselves. Airlines. What I learned at Comair as well is that airlines are very interesting platforms for extended businesses. At Comair, we started a very successful airline lounge business called the Slow Lounges. We started a catering company called Food Directions, which was today is a really successful catering company. We started a travel division. We did partnerships with banks. So, I also see and the airline is a really, really interesting platform business with it's a high profile industry. It gets lots and lots of attention. It attracts the right kind of customers with disposable income. So we're just going to be agile. We're just too difficult to predict what our long-term opportunities will be.
Gidon, thank you so much for sharing some time with me.
Thank you.